Welcome to The Journey. This is a conversation on leadership, culture, and theology. And today we are continuing the conversation that we have been having for a couple of weeks now, just having the privilege to share our time together with people that are very, very special to me. Obviously, I get the opportunity to talk to them, and this is people that in general I've known for now decades. But today, specifically today, man, we can definitely spend I don't know, several episodes and podcasts with this brother because my guest today, he and I, we go back to, Lord have mercy. I don't even want to say how many years, but I'll tell you this. We go back to very special times that we spent together on the road, in school, and specifically in ministry. And today I'm speaking, and I want to welcome my brother, Trevor Carpenter. My man, how you doing?
Awesome. How are you doing?
Dude, I am just glad to talk to you. You and I get to dialogue maybe once or twice a month, maybe sometimes more often, just via text, and sometimes we get on the phone. But to see you today, dude, this is a big deal for me. So thank you for taking the time, man. How things are going with you? Because I just want to ask you directly, dude. Give us an update. How things are going at home, family life. What's taking place?
Thanks for asking. Things are going well. I actually just celebrated 25 years of marriage yesterday.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
Yeah. 25 years, and that says more about Danielle than anything else, because of how great, she is. I've got two daughters, Hope and Liberty. Hope is a sophomore at the University of Hawaii, where she's an elementary education major, and she's got a part-time job where she's on staff at a church as a fifth and sixth grade minister. And then my youngest, Liberty, is a junior in high school. She runs track, and she's a part of the dance team at her local ballet studio. So that's what they're doing, and that's what they're up to. So we're just we don't live in South Texas, but we are enjoying life where we're at.
Dude, so basically you got a college girl and a high school girl. Is that where you are?
100%. Yep, right at that spot. That is exactly where I'm at.
And 25 years of marriage.
25 years of marriage. So yeah, no, all good. None of them are married yet. No grandkids yet. We do have a couple of cats, and we live in Oahu, Hawaii, on the island of Oahu.
Well, that was my next question, because again, when I go back to the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, and we have followed each other throughout the years, and now you find yourself in Hawaii. Now, reminds us, how do you ended up in Hawaii?
Okay, so in 2015, after a number of years of flunking out as a pastor, I picked up and I moved into the active duty military realm as a chaplain, and served as an active duty chaplain through the Navy, and was stationed in Virginia, and then I was stationed in Hawaii, and then I was stationed in Southern California. And while I was stationed in Hawaii, I wrote a curriculum along with another military chaplain who's a friend of yours, Ron Fisher, and was approached by a company, actually by the owner of a company, to talk about and bring about and build a spiritual formation wing in the corporate sector world. So after times of prayer and sorting through that, Danielle and I both felt that this was something that we were going to maybe explore and approach. And so what brought me to Hawaii to live was, while I was originally stationed there with the Navy, what brought me there to live was this reality of the work that I do now in the healthcare industry.
And how long you been in Hawaii total now? When did you guys transfer down there?
moved here in 2018, and my family has called it home ever since. So like I said, I spent a little bit of time in Southern California, but I didn't move my family. I would live a little bit in Southern California and commute back to Hawaii each month. So yeah, Hawaii's been home since 2018.
Okay, and again, so military life. How many years did you spend doing ministry in the military?
It ended up being 7 years active duty. I'm still currently in as a reservist, so still in that factor. But active duty, 7 years active duty. A couple of several deployments, multiple at seas in the Navy, and it was great. It was great. It was such a great it's such a great place to be.
This is what I call the providence of God, just God moving across, this journey that, again, you and I go back to early 2000s, late 90s, as we were driving from the Valley, which is where I met you, and we started, doing some other schooling, theological training, driving to Corpus Christi. And by the way, both of your girls, are they Valley girls in South Texas? No.
Yes, my oldest was born in Corpus. My youngest was born in McAllen.
Okay, that's what I thought. Thought.
And that's the running joke. People ask me all the time, how is life like in how's life like in Hawaii? And I tell people, well, if you've ever been to South Padre, and they said yes, I go, it's nothing like South Padre.
Never been in Hawaii, so there is no way for me to compare this, but I can only imagine. And for what I see, dude, you're loving it, aren't you?
It's nice. It's definitely nice. Danielle is a native Californian and a West Coast girl, so it's definitely more her culture, but we've loved every place we've been at. We loved South Texas. We loved Virginia. We loved Hawaii. We loved Southern California. So we've loved every area. It's what you make it. So we've enjoyed that. Yeah.
Well, that's great. That's great to hear that. And now, again, pastoral ministry, theological training, military chaplaincy, and even where you are right now, I know you continue to preach. And I know you are still involved, and because I know you're a very gifted preacher. I've known you for years. And what have you preached lately? What are you up to when it comes to preaching, teaching?
Well, interestingly enough, I have been teaching quite a bit lately, and being a part of different things. I end up helping local churches that are in transition, which is, you could say, at almost every church. And usually I'm brought in to address systemic change and what needs to take place, which is really not very innovative. What I really try to do is just get churches to remember what their first love is and who the centerpiece of that church is. Right before this call, I was actually on call with a church, and we were walking through some of their strategic plans, kind of how they're cultivating leaders, how are they structuring, they're needing to structure. Unlike a lot of churches after COVID that reduced, this church actually has grown. And so they have to build a better infrastructure for the people that are coming into the church. And it's so funny because I'm coming from the business world, where my job in the business world is corporate and company culture. And yet the churches asked me to come in and help address their needs with business answers. And what I find myself doing, Vidal, is reminding them that the Bible has actually already given them a strategy on how to work. And it's so amazing because here's these church leaders that are like, what? The Bible has things for me in my leadership development? I go, yeah, it's a really good book. You don't need to necessarily go to the business world to find the answers for the church. The business world should be looking for the church to give the answers. Pastors are so wound up on the latest taste or trend or, whatever it is, that they forget that, Christ said, I'll build my church.
That's right.
And he also says that the increase comes from the Lord, so what he asks us to do is talk about health. And it's amazing. So many churches that I end up addressing and visiting with, they want to build when really Jesus says, no, I'll do the building. You just be obedient to me. So I do a lot of that, so really I just find myself spending time reminding them of maybe what the word already says.
So you're doing some of the consulting, I guess, some sort of a consulting, and then all preaching.
Yes, they asked me to come in and fill the pulpit, and then as I come in and ask them questions that are contextual, we end up addressing some of those needs, because it's through the pulpit that you will do the guiding for that church for the most part, right? We're such a society in evangelical church world where it's still a come and see design. So then if it's a come and see design, then that means that people are going to have to do the leading through the pulpit.
Yeah. So
which ironically is very counterintuitive to the mission that Christ gave us, which was go and tell. But I guess a lot of pastors and leaders are forgetting that part, that we're supposed to send them out to go and tell rather than, hey, y'all come and see what Jesus is going to do. So
you're describing the attractional versus the incarnational, people just coming over, and then, that consumerism that is perpetuated, within those holy huddles. Hey, so remind me, because again, you and I talked throughout the years. You responded, you launched into ministry at what age?
So I graduated from college, and I had every summer I would work at a camp, and the camp is up in New Mexico, and it's kind of a wilderness camp where parents would drop their kids off, and we would teach them different types of skills, horseman skills, riflery, archery, rappelling, all that stuff. And in the evening, there were these campfire meetings, and there would be a little Bible story lesson for these kids. Very simple, very, very simple, very, very basic. And my then just a friend of mine, but she would become my wife, she heard me speak, and she said, there's a lot of things in life you could be doing, but there's one thing you really should be doing. And it's interesting because I had done some church work in college as an intern, but I was a science major. I didn't really think about necessarily going into vocational ministry. I actually had plans and designs to do something else, and it would be that statement that led me to go to prayer. And it was in that moment that the Lord used that inner dialogue to say, I want you to help people. And so it was in that year, that summer, that I was like, okay, Lord, I'm going to walk through any open doors until you shut them. And that was what I would think, the call to ministry, at least it came to me. There's a Roman philosopher, I think it's Seneca, not a Christian, by the way, who said, when your talents meet your circumstance, there is the calling. Right. So for me, it was always just I have these talents, and then where are the circumstances, and then that's where I'm drawn to. So, and that has been the way it's been even up to today. I just keep walking through open doors, and don't try to force open doors that are closed, and try to I've had desires, right? Like a lot of people that may listen to this podcast have a desire to do this, and I've run into the circumstances where, I'd like to do this and the door's been closed and the Lord doesn't open it. So the calling for me is more, what is it that I'm talented and gifted to do? And then where are the open doors of opportunity? Kind of 1 Corinthians chapter 16, there's a wide open door of opportunity for me. Right? Paul says that. Paul wanted to go to Asia. And he said the angel of the Lord was there telling him to go west, not east. So in that way, that's kind of been how I've practically looked at calling. Where is it that the door is being opened? And even if it may not look like what I want to go east, and the Lord's like, no, I actually want you to go west. For
some reason, just again, knowing what I know about you and your background, I remember you telling me in the past that part of your background before ministry, before pastoral ministry, you were involved in business. Now, did you major in business when you were at DBU, Dallas Baptist? No.
No, I'm actually I have a Bachelor of Science in Physics. I did not major in business, and uh, uh, I ended up now I didn't really work in business. My dad was a builder, and he was a towman, and he ran his own business. He had his own business, and from the age of 13, I worked for him. So every summer in San Antonio, I was working for him in that area, and it ended up being where I would learn how to do that. But even in college, I had a number of odd jobs, like a lot of people do in college, right? Odd jobs. But before I got into church ministry, I actually was working at a camp in South Texas, and I worked on the business end of the camp. But even then, it was for a nonprofit. I'd written a business model. In fact, that business model is still used by a lot of Texas Baptist camps on generating program money and all that kind of stuff. So I'd always had a foot kind of in that world. My dad kind of groomed me to take over his business at some point. But yeah, I don't know if that helps clarify.
It does, because I guess my next question is related a little bit of that, but more than that is just your leadership throughout the years. It seems to me that from early years, and even Dad having his own business, so that entrepreneurship mindset, and I'm trying to remember if you were involved in church planting, but I think you have, if I'm not mistaken. But my point, here's my point, because this is my next question I wanted to ask you. Especially in the realm, in the sphere that you have been for the last several years in the military. Apparently COVID found you in the middle of chaplaincy in the military, and the question that I've been asking is, knowing what you know, what we know today on a post-COVID experience, if today was December 1st, 2019, which is months before COVID arrived, or the breakthrough, knowing what you know, how would you prepare, your ministry? How would you prepare those that you are shepherding and ministering, in this case in the military, knowing what you know today?
Well, let me think about that. So the funny thing about COVID is so I was with the Marine Corps. I was with the 3rd Marines during that time, and the Marine Corps, they have a thing they always say: adapt and overcome. All right. So they adapted, and then they conquered that challenge, right? In the context of churches, what I saw with a lot of churches is they adapted to make their lives easier, right? So COVID happens, and everybody's in homes. And this is probably where, for some of your listeners, they're going to make comments and disagree and all that kind of stuff, and that's fine. But, one of the things that I felt in my spirit that was kind of talking was COVID was a chance for us to go back to our first indigenous nature of getting one-on-one with people. We couldn't meet in big groups. We had to have one-on-one conversations. And it got back to, as you were going, make disciples. Right now, I think the church actually missed a great opportunity, because what did most pastors do? They went online so they could still do their broadcast. All right, so they saw it, and there's probably smarter men than me and women than me, smarter people who were like, no, you need to go online, you need to do this, you do that. But it was almost like we missed this opportunity to train people to get one-on-one and become more indigenous in their workplaces and in their dialogue. Because one of the things that we see now in society is that there's a human nature factor that was missed, and it's the interpersonal contact, right? So we had this great opportunity to still get one-on-one, but instead people shelled up, they hold up in their homes, and they get on screens, and they try to do everything mass. And I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of times people now, when churches open back up, they didn't go back to church, because it's the easier, lazier thing to chime in online, you know. So now what I saw in the military was that we just made our meetings smaller. We made it more intimate. We made it more one-on-one. We instead of doing things in groups of 50, we did things in 15, you know. Instead of doing 15, we did things in 5. And so we adapted. And that was one thing that I saw that a lot of churches just were like, how do we go online? How do we spend money? And how do we, you know, do this? Which is fine. Again, Vidal, there's a reason why I'm probably not a local church pastor anymore. And so I think there's other guys that probably did a good job. I know one of our good friends, I was on the phone with him this morning, Chris Dupree at Baptist Temple. They had a great online presence, you know, but you know, I just noticed that maybe the Lord was asking us to do a better job of discipleship, and instead we just did a better job of performance for, once again, the big event. So I think if I was in December, I would say listen very carefully to what the Spirit of the Lord is doing and really meet the needs of some of the people that are hurting. This is going to be a great opportunity. The Lord never wastes time, talent, and resources.
Never.
So this is not a waste of time for him. So what do I need to do with my talents to go out and utilize those things, right? And so for the guy who's a great preacher, yeah, go online and do your preaching. For the guy who's a great pastor, I think the church took a big swing and a miss on that one, because we didn't seem to really, you know, we retreated to thinking that one size fits all, right? So I would tell pastors at that time, hey, here's a great opportunity for, you know, to maybe go back to discipling. I know that doesn't sound sexy, but boy, I think that would have been a great time.
You know, we're at the beginning of the football season when we're recording the podcast. This is just maybe week 3 or 2, I don't know, on football, NFL, professional football, and obviously high school and college as well. And one of the things that you see in those either players or teams that succeed is that they're very good at the fundamentals. So I think what you're describing is going back to the fundamentals, just going back to that noble idea of doing life together, of actually loving on one another. And that love obviously has to have an outward focus, that the love is projected on how we are, going back to the word that we used earlier, incarnation. You know, we are already doing it. We live in a world that, you know, we are doing life. It's just that is strategic, you know, intentionality. And I think that's exactly what you're describing. So Trev, if you can go back and just look at kind of an overview of the last, I don't know, 30 years, 30, whatever many years in ministry, and where you are today vocationally, how would you describe that pilgrimage? If you can just give it to me in a sentence, how would you describe it?
Well, it's funny because my wife and I were talking about this last night, because as we celebrated our 25 years of marriage, we finished Monday night, a couple nights ago, reviewing those 25 years. And you know, my in-laws call my wife and I the debriefers, because we debrief everything. So we were debriefing some of this, you know. And it's funny because about 2 years ago, Vidal, I was in Houston preaching at a church, and I had the opportunity to get with a couple of other friends of yours. Jimmy Villanueva was one, and Job Gonzalez, who both live in Houston. Well, we all went and we had a great steak dinner. And it's funny because the wives that were at that dinner said, I wish we could have recorded that, because y'all's conversation was so candid about the past number of years. And so for your listeners to understand, I like Vidal said, I do have some skills in the area of teaching and leading and being kind of a strategic thinker. So I found myself, Vidal, very quickly in my ministry life at the larger congregations, right? Being a youth pastor at a church that was larger than the average church, being an executive pastor at the age of 29, 30 of an even larger congregation. And then at 33, being a senior pastor already at what some people call like a mega church situation. What was interesting is that Jimmy Villanueva, Joe Gonzalez, and myself, we were talking about that the local church is so big on capturing talent that if you're a young person and you're brought in to a church leadership position, a lot of times it's because you're talented. It doesn't necessarily mean that your character has been formed. And so what I would tell what I've learned over the years is God is more concerned with your character But the local church, a lot of times, they're more concerned with your talent, about what you can give to the local church. So if the church is concerned about your talent, but God is concerned about your character, then you as an individual need to listen to God and go, okay, maybe I'm in this situation because of my giftings and talent, but really what's going to keep me there is my character.
Yeah. And
so I would tell myself over the 30 years, man, work on your character, work on your character, work on your character. You know, and so again, this goes back to the idea of God giving the increase and Jesus building the church, and us being concerned about health. How am I dealing with and my own healthy development of who I am, what my character is, what that looks like? And so I think as I've looked back now, is that if someone's listening to this and you look back at your own life and ministry, the Lord's going to lead you down places. He's given you giftings. Your giftings are going to make a way, but your character is what counts, right? And I think that's what we've seen over the years too, is that when you have people who fall out of vocational ministry, sometimes, the majority of the time, it's because of a character flaw.
That's right.
And so one of the things that we were talking about at that dinner just a couple of years ago was how grateful we were that we've noticed character flaws, because we were kind of plucked before we had fully ripened into who we were supposed to be. I mean, Vidal, I'm preaching sermons on a regular basis at 32 years of age, and I'm sitting here going, I don't even know necessarily doctrinally what I believe about certain things. And so I'd have people coming up and saying, you should be doing an altar call. And I go, well, I don't know. Is an altar call mandatory for everything? Or is it something that, I started studying it and I realized, wow, the altar call was something that was brought up in one of the great revival movements of American history. It's not written in the Bible. You got to have an altar call, but the thing was that I was already in the pulpit and I didn't know that. I was kind of, boy, you talk about the imposter syndrome, this idea of I'm just doing it because everybody, and really the church that brought me on as senior pastor, the two criteria that they told me, hey, we want you to be a senior pastor because the church is growing. They weren't saying, hey, we want you to be the pastor because we think your character is something that would be a good shepherd and a good under pastor for as Christ is the senior pastor. I remember one time I was in an interview with a church to be the youth minister, and the church said, I said, do you have any questions for me? And they were like, yeah, is it true that you had 250 kids at a Disciple Now weekend retreat? But they were more concerned with the size of the situation than they were about, where I was at. And so I think one of the things that I've looking back now, close to 30 years of doing work in the kingdom, is God's concerned about your character more than he is concerned about your talent. The second thing that I would notice over the 30 years is God's not concerned about your empire. He's concerned about his kingdom. Wow. And so, I think one of the things, especially vocational ministers think, is they think that their local empire is the center of God's kingdom, and they don't recognize that God is moving in other places even more substantial. When I started my doctoral work, I was working on religious anthropology, and I wanted to focus on Africa because of what God's doing in the Southern Hemisphere. But this from being in different areas, especially with your work in Central America and South America, God is doing things in the Southern Hemisphere that the Northern Hemisphere cannot even fathom. And your growing Christian and church is surprisingly looks nothing like 3 hymns, announcements, and then a sermon. There's this movement going. In fact, it's one of the things that I do now. I mean, one person the other night, I was at a dinner, and one person said, man, you're leading the largest church in the state of Hawaii. And I said, well, I'm not even leading a church. He goes, you're the head of spiritual formation for the largest healthcare system in Hawaii now. Your church is this corporate sector. And from that perspective, that's an interesting point. But it was interesting, that pastor that said that to me, he was noticing that God is doing something in the business secular world that he's not even doing in the local church. And so I think one of the other things that I would challenge other ministerial leaders is to realize is that there's a lot going on in the tent building world, that God is doing. And maybe it's because a lot of times in the institutional church, we're so focused on keeping the lights on, keeping giving up, keeping, running programs. What do we got to do to keep this Awana program going? What do we got to do to keep, RAs and G? We've forgotten, and here's the point I'm going to bring. We've forgotten that our ministry is to the mission, not to the model.
That's right.
And I think a lot of people, they really feel called to the model, but they've forgotten that what they're really called to is the mission. The model is a vehicle, right? So I drive a truck and I love my truck, but at some point I'm going to have to get rid of that truck and move on to something else, whether it's broken down, whether it's in a wreck, whether it's just worn out, right? Or whether I choose to give it to somebody else. I'm not going to just drive one vehicle. However, I'm always going to need to get from one place to another, right? And so for us to look at our ministerial models as those vehicles, these are tools to help me with my mission, right? And I think one of the things that's threatening a lot of people is they've really gotten wound up around their mission, or they've got their mission wound up around the model, rather than, no, I need to keep focusing on the mission. I think it's a big distraction. So those are things over the past 30 some odd years that I think I've picked up on.
It seems to me that sometimes that model has become the mission, and that's where we get trouble, right? And that's where we treat the models or the methodologies as sacred, or maybe theology, doctrine, which make it non-negotiable, where they, just like the illustration of the truck, they gotta change. They gotta, especially in your case, when you have moved from places and cultures and scenarios, you obviously have seen different models in different scenarios, but the mission has remained the same. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to remain, and especially based on that character, which, by the way, just and maybe this is interconnected to what you just described, which is extremely important, what you just said. If you can speak to your younger version of yourself as you are entering ministry, vocational ministry, back in the day, whenever that was, and again, you were sharing about Danielle speaking into your life back then, even before you guys got married, and things like that, and that developmental into theological training and eventually moving into vocational ministry. What would you say to yourself if you can speak to the younger version of Trevor Carpenter?
It's good. By the way, for the listeners of the podcast, my wife tells me I need to listen to Vidal a lot more because he's such a sober voice. So I thank you for that. I should have listened to you a lot more. I think what I would have said was my relationship with Christ is going to be more treasure than my relationship with my vocation. That knowing him is better than serving him.
Wow.
I would have encouraged myself to spend more time in prayer and in the Word, and less worried about what Andy Stanley or Ed Young Jr. at the time, or Life Church is doing. Not to be so concerned with what the latest gimmick was for church, but to really understand that my relationship with Christ is more valuable and important. I would have also told myself, churches and ministry are going to come and go, but you're only going to get your kids for one shot. I would have spent more time in some of the earlier development of my children. I missed a lot of Christmas Eve with my children because we had to do multiple Christmas Eve services, and at the church I was at there in McAllen at the time, we did big Christmas Eve stuff. I mean, it was like Santa came and vomited all over the place. And we did a mariachi Christmas. We did a Frank Sinatra Christmas. We did all, I mean, it's great. And hundreds, several thousand people came. It was still amazing, but yet I'm never going to get to see my 5-year-old on Christmas Eve again. And they would come to a service, but like, I think one of the things that we tend to think about as ministers is God needs us. And if we do it, then somehow God's kingdom is not going to take place. And that's so narcissistic. That's so narcissistic of us, right? And so I think I would have said that a little bit more. I think I would have told myself, be okay with your insecurities. I would look at other leaders at conferences, and that, by the way, maybe one thing I would have told myself is, don't go to so many conferences. But cultivate who you are. In fact, I'll give you an example. I'm reading a biography of an actor who has since passed away, and the actor actually was a Christian. So he's talking about his acting career from a Christian's perspective. And he says that when he was younger, he became bald. All right. So I know you and I, like some of us are shaven. He was bald, and he said he always thought that was a detriment in his acting. But then he started developing his character roles, and people started wanting a bald person to be this character. And he makes an interesting comment in his memoirs. He said, what I thought was my biggest detriment was actually something that God wanted to use to be a strength. And that sounds very much like Paul when Paul says, in my weaknesses, he is strong. So I think what I would have said to my younger self, Vidal, is get to know what my weaknesses are, and let Christ be glorified through those weaknesses, rather than me trying to hide those weaknesses so that I could be a Superman. There's only one. Yes, yeah, you're right. Right. And that flies into a lot of the self-help guru stuff that we find ourselves in church life. You need to self-improve. No, you should seek to be the best version of who you can be, but you're always going to have certain limitations. And it's in those limitations that if we hand them over to God, he ends up being glorified through that. Okay? So personally, I use my speaking ability as an example, because I was a stutterer growing up. And even speech therapists, when they're in congregations, when they hear me speak, they go, when you were younger, were you a stutterer? I said, I did. I was. And they said, we could tell because you've been coached on how to work around. Well, I can seek improvement, but I also need to be aware that some things I'm not going to be able to improve on. I'm just going to have to hand it to the Lord, And so I would have told myself earlier, be okay with that. Be okay that God can actually be, glorified in what I'm weak at. I would have liked myself better. And then a second thing, Vidal, is this: ministers were very performance driven. I find value when I'm performing. Okay. Now the problem with that is that if you're performance driven and you don't meet the mark, then you're going to feel like a failure. And a lot of ministers feel like they're failures because they're not performing enough. Right. My church isn't growing enough. I don't have this ministry that's expanding where I want to. But here's my question that I would ask somebody: you and I don't love our children based on what they do for us. We love them based on who they are. That's right. We don't love our spouses based on what they do for us. We love them based on who they are. Well, I would suggest that we don't be so hypocritical by loving others because of who they are, but loving ourselves just because of what we do. Now, I'm not saying you need to be in love with yourself. That's narcissism. But the Bible does say he who loves himself seeks wisdom, right? And Paul writes that we're to be the aroma of Christ. So I would say that we do that to ourselves first. I love myself based on who I am. I don't love myself based on what I do. And so maybe rather than being performance driven, I would have told myself, maybe be a little bit more grace, mercy, and love driven. Right? And because as pastors, we give that to other people, but I need to give myself grace and mercy and love. And so I would have told myself that a little bit earlier.
You reminded me of in everything you describe right now, especially when it comes to those conferences, which we're not against those conferences, but again, they sometimes become the driving force in just going back to what you said earlier in the context of community and relationships. You may not remember this, but I was in Aransas Pass. I was serving Aransas Pass, still trying to finishing up seminary up in Corpus, and you, if I'm not mistaken, I think you were the executive pastor, because I think the senior pastor was in the group. But you guys, as a staff, you drove from McAllen all the way to Dallas to go to one of those big conferences in Dallas, and you guys picked me up on the way, and I drove with you guys. And it was a lot of fun. But the point that I'm trying to make is the conference was good and it was helpful. But to me, this is what I remember of that trip. I remember how much I enjoyed and learned just having that conversation with your staff, just hanging out with you guys and getting to know some of those guys, because I didn't know them. I never met him before. But anyways, I'm just reminded that, sometimes we missed, the fundamental non-negotiables for some of the things that potentially become trivial and become superficial, which again, I'm not against conferences, obviously, and growing in knowledge. But yeah, but we got to come back to those basic experiences in life. Hey, let me make the question more personal.
Let me even say this real quick in our podcast. I remember that conference. I remember that time, and I remember up on
you do,
and I remember up on stage there were three very prominent ministers. Ed Young Jr., Andy Stanley, and Greg Laurie, right? And I remember Ed Young was talking about, as a pastor, you got to keep your eye on, what the society's doing, what the culture has, all this kind of stuff. And Andy Stanley talked about that he has a team and they try to develop a theme and they try to, what's going to meet the need and cater to the person in the congregation. And I'll never forget, because I thought to myself, I'm never going to be as cool as Ed Young Jr. I'm never going to be as smart maybe as Andy Stanley would be. But then Greg Laurie spoke, and Greg Laurie said, I try to read the Bible all through the week. And then when I get up into the pulpit, I just ask the Lord, what does he want to say to my heart, to the people, out of overflow of what I've been doing with the Lord. And I remember I came home and I thought, I could do that. I can't, I'm not very cool and I'm not very smart, but I can read the Bible and I can do that. And it was interesting because I didn't need to go to a conference to learn that. Like the Lord was like, read the word up. But what I remember the most about any conference that I still hold dear to me is what you just said. It was the relationship and the dialogue with my friends and brothers that we went to that conference with. So, I would say that our trips from the Valley, when you were at Port Isabel, you and I would drive up to Corpus Christi for seminary. That time in the car was just as important as being in the classroom. So I agree with you 100% about that. But that's really the benefit of those kind of things, is the dialogue of iron sharpening iron in that. Yeah. Anyway.
No, you're right. You're right. And again, we're in a time and age that tragically, some of the things that we're describing, they have been either forsaken, forgotten, whether it's intentional or maybe distracted by some of these things. And this is where we need to come back and definitely reaffirm some of this. But let me transition to something that is very dear to my heart, which is,
yes,
about, this is 2023. So 10 years ago, I went to, it was 2013, January 2013, I went to First Baptist Church in Far. And I was 40, I'm 50 now. So I was 40, and the church was celebrating 100 years, the year that I came on board. And it was a major transition for me, because my background was primarily church planting. I was on a staff in other churches, but I've never been at a First Baptist, 100-year-old church. And for some reason, that transition in my life, and I guess I also was kind of at the crossroads, because my kids are a little older than yours. I was at a crossroads where I was seeing the transition from, young life into adulthood in the life of my kids. And the concept of the ministry of succession became very, very tangible, very real for me. And I mean, I was 40, so I don't think I was old, but I saw that it was time for me to really see how the baton is going to be passed to the next generation. And, now, today, I got a 25-year-old that is about to get married in about 3 months. My firstborn, and then my Rebecca, which is 23. She is extremely smart and pursuing a master's degree in marine biology. And then I have a son who surrendered to the ministry a couple of years ago. And I'm bringing this up because here is my question to you. Because again, I'm listening to your narrative. I'm listening, and I've been following you. And you and I, we have a relationship. And I knew where your girls were kind of in their stage in life. But all that to say, here's my question. So as they move into adulthood, and especially as they are serving already in the local church, what would you tell them? If the call, or if the season of life is in ministry and serving and involved in the local church, you obviously have some mileage into that experience and your passion for the scriptures and the Lord. So what would you tell the next generation, but specifically to your girls?
Well, that's interesting because Vidal, a few months ago, I took my daughter, my oldest, to dinner, and she thought that the church that she's now serving in, the children's minister, was going to be, her the invitation to come to work on staff. And first off, what I've tried to do, Vidal, and I'm sure same thing, with your children. I'm sure that a lot of the listeners do the same thing with their children who are in the ministry, is that you to force your way how you did it onto your kids, right? They need to have an individual relationship with the Lord where they can go to the Lord to get direction. Now, what my daughter does is, I had to be careful not to tell her the answers to the test, so to speak. Dad, what do I do there? Well, you need to go to the Lord first. What's the Lord saying? What's the Lord saying? It's his ministry. If he wanted me to do it, then he would have called me to do it. He would have had me go do it, but he didn't. He called you to go do it. So you need to develop that on your own. I'm not going to give you the answers to the test. You got to go to the teacher. So that's the first thing I would say, is cultivate the relationship with the Lord. Number two, let them know at their disposal, I'm always here to be a sounding board. So the way it works at the church that she's on staff at, the 5th and 6th graders go and they have their own worship service kind of time. And I'm not here to argue whether or not that's the right model or whatever. Again, that goes back to, that's just a vehicle, right? But they do their own music and then they do their own teaching, and my daughter is the one doing the teaching. So she's been putting together these sermonettes to preach to the 5th and 6th graders during the group teaching.
That's so exciting, man. That is so exciting.
It is exciting because what I noticed is that she's got some talents that I see that are from me, but then she has some talents that she got from her mom. And then there's some talents that are completely birthed out of what the Holy Spirit's been doing in her life on her own. So what you then do is you celebrate. If you're a parent, you celebrate the fact. Maybe it doesn't look like the way you would do it. Maybe it doesn't look like how you would do it. Maybe it doesn't look like anything that you would do. But the fact is that, why can't we just celebrate that she's working and building the kingdom of Christ? Like that, first and foremost, just celebrate it. I'm just celebrating that God's doing this through him. And then number two, when you if you have a good relationship with your child anyway, they're going to want to come to you and let them ask the questions. Don't. Sometimes I think pastors and ministers, we are answers looking for a problem. I have the answer, so I'm going to go look for a problem. Maybe you're trying to answer something that we're not even asking. So wait and let your kid ask the question. And then I would also encourage this. I would what's behind the question they're asking? Because it's not just about the question, but there's something behind that they're asking. And so what I've been really good to do is I've given my daughter a lot of resources that I found very good. I love free resources like the Blue Letter Bible. I've been quick to give her commentaries that I thought were very good for me. Introduce her to people that I thought were good teachers. And then let her at it. Because if I try to force feed my kid a book that really meant a lot to me, and they're not asking for it, they're never going to read it. It's going to be a drink coaster, in their room. But when they come to you and they go, hey, Dad, this is what I'm working through, show them the tools that helped you. And then they'll use that as well. So that's what I've done with my daughter. And it's so great because the other night I took her to dinner and she's doing a Bible study through the book of Jonah over 4 weeks with her 5th and 6th graders. And she was like, Dad, can you listen to the message I'm going to give? And she came out, she brought her notebook out and she went through the whole thing. And really, I didn't listen for the homiletic approach. I didn't listen for good hermeneutics. I was just celebrating that my 19-year-old daughter is serving the Lord.
Hmm.
And I would tell parents, don't miss that moment. Don't miss that moment. Am I right? I mean, would you do the same thing?
Oh my goodness, dude. You reminded me that we see our kids serving Jesus not because of us, but in spite of us as parents. That's kind of my conclusion, because we see the kids, like as pastors, as ministers, as adults, parents. It's one thing for the joy and the privileges that we get to serve the church, to serve others, to do what we do. And again, we wouldn't have it any other way. And I'm sure you agree with me on that. But it's a very different feeling and experience when you see them exercising on their own, making their own decisions to seek the face of God. That is a completely different experience, because once again, you see the promises of God, the covenant of God, just moving through generations. This is what I was saying earlier in the ministry of succession, because I get to serve a lot of churches in COVID, and even before COVID. We as churches, we Christians, everything that you described for the last 30, 40 minutes, to me boils down that we typically do life and do ministry as if we are it. Everything evolves and revolves around us, and we do not do a good job preparing those who are coming behind us, which is discipleship. So in this case, as you know, discipleship, evangelism, for that matter, is presented in the Bible very, very holistic, I guess that's the word I'm looking for. Is something that is, because what you just described on the way that you are having the conversations with your girls, my assumption, and I wasn't there obviously, my assumption is the way they were raised, that this is not just because of a Bible study or a sermonette or a theological conversation. This is just the way of life, that when the opportunity came to respond to a specific area of ministry or desire or giftedness, it was just the overflow of what was taking place prior, which again, this is the result of 25 years of marriage invested with a very intentional mindset, that by the time those girls showed up, man, it was game day. You gotta move into this deal and continue doing it together. Hey, Trev, so today is the last day on the face of the earth. This is it. It's over for you and I. 3 sentences, 3 statements, truths that you can leave behind if today was it.
I think I would pass on the value of identity to those around me. I would try to touch I would try to touch those people who at funeral are going to be missing me the most. And I tell people this: pour into your 6, right? And what I mean by 6 is, if you were going to be buried in the casket, your spouse is going to have 6 guys that are going to carry your casket to the grave. Who are those 6 people that your significant other would say, would you carry my spouse's casket? Reach out to those 6, remind them of the value they have to you. Reach out to your family, your children, your spouse, touch them. I would spend my day investing in those people, and then being open to the Lord, that whoever he brings to me in contact on that day, that I would be a faithful witness to him. I think that's how I do it. Yeah.
Wow. So you got an invitation from a seminary somewhere in the world to do one course to pastors, church planters, seminary students, maybe young, maybe our age, whatever the case may be. And the seminary gives you a blank check. You get to choose the topic, the subject, the book of the Bible, whatever that may be. You get one shot. What would you teach?
I think I would teach something along the lines of, how can you mature in Christ?
Okay.
You mature in Christ.
So
Because
Christ likeness.
yeah, yeah. I like the old subject that T.W. Hunt wrote, having the mind of Christ. How do I shape myself in having the mind of Christ?
You know, you are um, making me or forcing me to ask this question, and I want to ask the question to you. If or since Christ likeness is, man, it's foundational, why do you think that we as Christians see the growth and the development into Christ likeness or maturity in Christ as optional? Why do we see that as optional? And therefore, we have this craziness going on in the church and everywhere else. What would you attribute that?
I think that's because we get easily distracted. I think we get distracted, right? If I can share like a story from the Navy, one of my deployments was a chaplain that involved the people that I was a chaplain for involved a special operations team, and I was talking with the member of the spec ops team who was an instructor at the famous Buds school that where they train Navy SEALs. And I asked the senior chief, do you, when people come to Buds, do they know who's going to make it and who's not? And the senior chief said, everyone that comes has a SEAL inside them, but it's surrounded by a bunch of distractions. So what we do during the course is we try to strip away the distractions so that all that's left is the SEAL. And the ones who want to hold on to their distractions, those are the ones that get up and ring the bell. And I remember when he told me that, I was on the flight deck of a ship. We were at sea, we're actually on our way to the deployment. And when he told me that on the flight deck, immediately I thought, that's what I want to be for Christ. So strip away any of the things that are distractions so that all that remains is that Christ in me, right? So here's the crazy thing. Jesus doesn't die to make you a Christian. Jesus does not make you a Christian. He dies so that he can live you and you can be conformed into the likeness of Christ. So I think what we do is I think that we have these accoutrements of what a good Christian looks like. They sing in the choir, they're on the praise team, they volunteer at the church, they go to the men's pancake breakfast, they volunteer as a greeter. And we get wrapped up in all these side things. That's not why Jesus died. Jesus died so he could live in you and you could be conformed to the likeness of Christ. That's what the Bible says, right? He doesn't die so that you can be a good church member. But I think we get distracted with all these side things, which, by the way, if the devil can't make you bad, he'll make you busy. So he doesn't need you to be antichrist. He just needs you to be so busy that you're not busy cultivating into what the main thing is. And the main thing is the main thing, and that's you're to be conformed to Philippians 1:6. He who began the good work will be faithful to complete it. So I think one of the things is we get so distracted. And we love our distractions, instead of doing the real thing, which is Jesus, conform me and strip away everything so that all that's left is the likeness of you in my life. And I think that's why it's called glorification, right? You were into that role as you enter into heaven. Anything less is, as the old Reichart commercial, anything less is uncivilized.
Well, and again, I think part of the role of leadership and shepherding and discipleship is to give or to present or to remind one another the cost of the development of the character of Jesus in us, because it's pretty obvious that by nature our character doesn't move towards Christ likeness. By nature, our character moves in the opposite direction. And so this is an experience of intentionality. This is an experience of, again, directiveness into that. And for that, again, I think this is part of the reason teaching the Bible plays a major role. And man, I want to give you just again a huge congratulations for your 25th anniversary, which is a major deal. That's an amazing deal. And then to see your girls serving Jesus, my goodness, that's just an amazing deal. So I'm grateful for you, brother. I'm grateful to know you and to call you my brother. And it's been an amazing journey of friendship throughout a couple of decades now. And I'm eager to see what the Lord is going to do in your family, in your marriage. And brother, thank you so much for your time. I do appreciate you.
Well, Vidal, thank you so much. I respect you so much, and I respect the work you do and the Bible teachings that you have. You know, your Bible app is on my phone. I get the notifications. I think what you and Dr. Elliott are doing is phenomenal. And you know, in fact, the other day when you sent me a link when you were in Juarez and I was playing and I had the volume on, and I know I already told you this on the phone, but Danielle heard your voice and she said, I forgot how much of a great voice he's got. So, man, I would love to do this. I'd love to do this more often. Let's take a topic one day and just do that on the podcast and unpack that topic, you know, and we've covered so many subjects today that I would love to go further down. So you opened up by saying we could have a longer conversation. Let's do it. Let's just have multiple ones. So you give me the theme and then I'll study, and then let's discuss it. I learned so much from you. I know a lot of pastors learn from you. I know a lot of ministers and leaders learn from you. But Vidal, you're such a gift to our world. You're such a gift to God's kingdom. So to be a part of that is just such a humble honor.
Amen. I appreciate your friendship. I appreciate you so much. And we haven't seen each other in a long time, personally, in person, but we got to figure out a way to do it, to make it happen. And I was at Juarez. I was at the motherland in beautiful El Paso, which is where that's where
I grew up.
Done.
Yeah, and I'll be in Texas in November. I'll be in Fort Worth for a weekend. I think that's the next time I'm in Texas. But I'm in California in October, and California in November, and then in Texas in November as well. But yeah, get on out here to Hawaii.
I'm gonna work things around and make sure that I get to the DFW. Actually, I'm recording from DFW. I just flew in today. I got several commitments throughout the weekend, and I get the privilege to speak to men over the weekend, which is, I mean, I know you recently did it. So last time I talked to you, you were
yes. You actually helped me through a very tricky circumstance that worked out really well. So thank you for that. You're just such a great guy. You're such a great leader.
I remember our conversation, so I'm glad it worked out for you, man. I get to do that this weekend. Friday and Saturday, I'm gonna be at Leakey, Texas, which is Alto Frio in that northwest of San Antonio, which I know
absolutely
you're familiar with that area. Hey, my brother, I love you, and thank you so much again. And we got to do this again often. Let's get back, and I know our folks, as they watch and listen to the podcast, they want to come and learn from you, because that was extremely helpful what you presented, and very real, which is typical of you. So we'll see you next time. Is that okay?
Blessings. I look forward to it. Let's make it happen.